as the U.S. continues to push for war and, as you said, has nothing to offer in any other area, despite being this hegemon and perhaps oversized influence in the geopolitical realm. There is a lot happening, and I know you follow Asia a lot in particular, but maybe we can focus both on Asia and Africa with regard to what China is doing. And I just want to pull up because there's this issue of cluster bombs that is often spoken about now, given that the United States is handing cluster bombs to Ukraine and the consequences of that. Well, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, these countries know what that is like very well. And I wanted to first pull up what has been happening between China and Laos. So this article is in the Maldives news network. And in 2021, there was the launch of the Sino-Lao Railway. And here you can see it's the high-speed rail that's connecting, I believe it's the capital of Laos to Kunming in China. And so here, though, is an important fact that I don't think many people know, is that the UN Department of Economic and Social Affairs discussed how during the construction of this railway for 2 years, January 27 to July 2019, so about 2.5 years, about 459 unexploded ordnance and more than 460 pieces of related debris were removed from about 2,931 hectares of land. So these kind of bombs, the landmines, the cluster bombs, China was literally part of that assistance. And now I just want to pull up the results of that. What exactly happened? Now, not only is the Sino-Lao Railway doing, commercial trade and various other activities, but it's also now open for passenger service across the border. So here is just a short video showing what from Xinhua News, so Chinese state news media. But I think it's a good picture into what China is doing with partner countries like Laos to build something that actually benefits everybody. So here we go.
ระวังรถไฟลาวจีนไปหา ประเทศจีนหรือว่าประเทศจีนมาลาวนี่ก็ถือว่าเป็นเอิ้นว่าประวัติศาสตร์แห่งการประพันธ์การทำมือเฮ็ดให้ประชาชนลาวพอนี่อันนึงมันจะได้มีความสะดวกสบายในการไปหาสู่กันอันที่2มาก็2ประเทศนี้ประชาชน2ประเทศนี้จะได้เรียนรู้วัฒนธรรมขนบธรรมเนียมของกันและกันหลายคือสามารถจะมีความสะดวกให้นักท่องเที่ยวบ่ว่าจะลาวแล้วก็ต่างประเทศไปประเทศจีนหลายขึ้นและนักท่องเที่ยวจีนก็จะมาประเทศลาวหลายขึ้นความจริงแล้วข้าพเจ้ามีความรู้สึกภาคภูมิใจและการเปิดรถไฟข้ามแดนระหว่างลาวจีนเวียงจันทน์1เนี่ยซึ่งเป็นชิดหมายประวัติศาสตร์ในการปกปักร่วมมือกับชาติอีกอันนึงจะเป็นความมิตรหมายที่ดีโดยเฉพาะคนลาวจะได้ข้ามไปจีนโดยผ่านรถไฟ
So, I mean, that's the I mean that it looks great. I certainly want to travel on that. And you know, one just quick reaction before I get your take, Brian, is I mean, these are two countries that have been historically close, but to be fair, have had very little contact because of the fact that it is hard to travel between these two countries. Now there is this very convenient way of traveling, communicating, just among people, from people to people, but also just the business activity that it generates is it's certainly historic and really a landmark achievement, one that you don't hear much about, especially the fact that China basically put its money where its mouth is and said, we're going to also help you with something that is incredibly difficult, which is the unexploded ordnance, which litter the country. But anyway, what is your take, your reactions to that?
Yes, I have actually traveled from Kunming to Thailand through Laos, roughly along the route that this train now travels, and that was a 3-day trip. It was a nightmare. There was no highway, there was no railway. This was 2007, and you were on these windy mountain roads, extremely dangerous. The bus drivers drove day and night. There was no stopping. It still took 3 days, and so you're right. That is going to be daunting to any tourist and any business, any type of logistics at all. That will be very daunting. It was very landlocked, and it was extremely impoverished. Laos was very impoverished. I've gone there many times, and I've seen how it has been improving as Thailand, Vietnam, and also China have been investing heavily and taking advantage of the links that China built. So they built a highway first, which took that 3-day trip and cut it down to 24 hours by road. And now the train, they said 10 hours. That is incredible. From 3 days to 10 hours. And I saw people in the comment section commenting, and they were talking about the script in Lao looking like Thai language. It's very similar. If you can read Thai, you can basically read Lao. There's just a couple you might have to figure out. And the language is very similar. So if you speak Thai, a lot of people in Laos speak Thai, but also their own language is very similar, just FYI. And they also talked about Thai people crossing the border to ride on the train. And I have Thai friends who have done that. They have gone to Laos just to ride the high-speed train. And it's incredible. So we always hear the Western media, oh, these are debt trap boondoggles that have no meaning, irrelevant. You know, we build political whatever, like things that are intangible, and they're just building railways. And a railway is actually how you build a modern, a thriving civilization. You need infrastructure, you need power, you need transportation, you need rail. And if you're not doing that, then you're going to be left behind. And the West doesn't offer that. They offer them political meddling, political parties, human rights organizations that don't actually care about human rights, all of this meddling in the internal political affairs, the education system, like an infection just taking over everything. They don't build infrastructure. China builds infrastructure. Worse still, when the U.S. attempts to politically capture a country through, say, color revolution or undermining and through sedition, if that doesn't work, they use warfare. and they dropped bombs, and they dropped more bombs on Laos than there were even human beings living there. To this day, unexploded ordnance, I believe there's about 8 per man, woman, and child living in the country. That's how many are still there. And so when people say China builds and the US bombs, that is absolutely true. It's not a boondoggle. There was a woman there that said she had never been on a train before. A lot of people in Laos, everyone in Laos was never on a train before because they never had a train before. Think about that. And so the US for decades held more or less primacy over Asia, and that's what they did with that primacy: bombing and undermining progress and development, pseudo development. USAID would come in and build some water towers in rural villages so that they wouldn't have to depend on the central government, so that they could encourage separatism. That's what the US has been doing in this region. China is now coming in and connecting everyone with infrastructure, all kinds of infrastructure projects. This high-speed rail is just one of many examples. There's a high-speed rail link that will go from Laos to Thailand to Bangkok, and then onward to Malaysia, possibly Singapore. And this is going to drive development. It's going to drive the economy. And already, Thailand has standard rail all throughout the country. They are moving goods by truck and rail to the border to take advantage of the high-speed rail now that it exists. So it is definitely not debt trap diplomacy. This is real development, and it's China that's doing it, and it's the United States. When they say we're going to answer to the Belt and Road Initiative, they have no answer. They can't compete with it. What they mean by that is they're going to stop it. They're going to roll it back, and if they need to, they will physically destroy it, which we talked about earlier. They are actually doing that and have been for years. So again, this is the reality of things, and for people out there who understand that the Western media is lying to them about everywhere else, but when it comes to China, they say, "Oh, they're just trying to take over Southeast Asia. They're trying to take over Africa. They're building the rail to get the resources out." They're not doing that. I've seen it with my own eyes, and you can look at the development that it's driving. It is tangible. You can see it with your eyes.
Definitely, and at the moment, actually, Algeria's president. He is visiting China, and he's getting the red carpet treatment, unlike how the United States treats other leaders, which is essentially, I mean, how many times does the U.S. actually invite other leaders to the White House, unless it's bringing in Yoon Suk Yeol to sing American Pie and humiliate himself, and or bringing Modi in to try to how should I say, bribe him into leaving BRICS. Other than that, you don't really have much diplomacy at all. So Abdulmajid Tebboune, he is in Beijing right now for a 5-day visit. And at the same time, there was this story reported, Brian, and I know you have been sharing content about how what the U.S. did to Libya. It destroyed the country, but what the U.S. is building in places, what China is building in places like Kenya, is actually achieving development. But there's this interesting story happening right now all over the world, a humongous heat wave. It is devastating. When I was in China, the heat was just overwhelming at times. 105 degrees in Beijing sometimes. In Shanghai, it would be 99 with like humidity to a level I've never experienced, even though I've been many humid places. But here you have Chinese contractors literally completing the final stretch of a highway in an incredible heat wave all across the continent. And so it's the east-west highway in Algeria's easternmost province. The workers, Algerian and Chinese, are braving extreme heat, laying asphalt. I don't know if anyone's ever laid asphalt in extreme heat. That is brutal stuff. But according to the highway project, the head of the highway project at Algeria's National Highway Agency told Xinhua that the section holds this highway pivotal importance because its opening signifies the full completion of a 1,216 kilometer long east-west highway connecting 17 Algerian provinces and bringing the country closer to other Arab countries. So I just wanted to bring that up as another example. I mean, we're talking about 100, over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, over 30 plus degrees Celsius every single day during this heat wave. And still, they're rushing to complete it. Even during the pandemic, everything was shut down. China did not shut down its projects abroad. It continued to help out its Belt and Road countries. And we're talking about more than $1 trillion US, which is a lot of money in Chinese terms, invested all around the world for these kind of projects. But I'll kick it back to you, Brian.
Absolutely. I just recently shared a post on Telegram from Jeremy Nell of Germ Warfare, and he showed the destruction of Libya. And then he showed a new rail station in Kenya, and he was comparing and contrasting the U.S. approach to foreign policy and China's. And again, it's the U.S. bombs and divides and destroys, and China builds and connects people together. And in the comment section, and I get people like this in my audience, and I'm sure you do too, Danny, where they agree with you on everything else, but when it comes to China, they said no, absolutely not. Oh, the railway in Kenya is not turning over a profit, and they miss so many points here, because rail or any other type of infrastructure is not the same as a private business where you set it up and you need it to make money or you go out of business. It's not the same. Infrastructure has a much greater value than it in and of itself. It is connecting people together in a country, creating economic opportunities for everyone living in the country. It boosts the entire economy, regardless of how profitable or unprofitable it itself happens to be. And when you open it, it could take years for it to actually, fully get, maximum ridership, turn a profit on certain routes, and for development to really get going along the route. And I remember this because when I first came to Thailand, that was when they were building the elevated train lines in Bangkok. And it had just opened, and it went all the way to the edge of the city, what used to be the edge of the city, I should say. And there's nothing there really. It's very small and quiet. Today, if you go to that same place, there's skyscrapers there, and the city extends out even further because that infrastructure made that possible. You cannot go into an infrastructure project with a private enterprise mentality, because then it will never happen. Look at the United States. It will never happen because there's no profit in it. You have to think bigger than that. It's going to be an engine for progress. And this is what China proved with their high-speed rail internally. A lot of people said that it's going to be a disaster. It's a boondoggle. It's not going to help anything. Well, look at China. Look at it. Danny, you were just there. Look at it. That drove. Yeah, I mean, it drove development, and it will continue to drive development. It has more value than it itself in selling tickets for those train seats or moving freight. It has much more value than that. And that's what people can't understand. Between that innate hatred toward China because of their ideology or their racial views, then you couple that with these U.S. government-funded propaganda narratives, and you put all that together with you don't understand infrastructure and economics. You put that all together and you say, oh, it's debt trap diplomacy. It isn't. Kenya needs trains. Every country, every modern economy needs trains. They need ports. They need schools. They need power plants. They need all of this, or they are not going to have a modern civilization. All the things that we take for granted, they are not going to have. Why shouldn't they have it? Why shouldn't they have train lines connecting their towns and their cities, and then connecting them to other nations to do more trade together? Why can't they have that? So people have to understand they are being tricked into going along with what is fundamentally an anti-human agenda. This is you're against human beings being allowed to have a life, prosper, have peace and stability. You're against that by saying, oh, we have to oppose China. Yes, they're building this, but that it's just to take over everyone. It is not. And people say, well, why are they doing it? They're making money doing the projects, and they're also increasing trade. That's what they do. They do business, and building infrastructure allows them to do more business. It's that simple. It's not an evil scheme. like an IMF loan that doesn't build anything tangible. It is building tangible infrastructure so that they can benefit through trade. It's as plain as that. And finally, not to get off too far off the topic, but they don't have an equivalent of the National Endowment for Democracy. They do not have all these organizations and agencies and institutions reaching into another nation's internal political affairs and trying to shape it. They don't do that. As a point, they believe in non-interference, and you can see that. I don't see them coming into Thailand and saying, we're a communist and you're a constitutional monarchy, so obviously we're not doing business with you until the sickle and hammer is flying over your capital. They don't do that. But that is what the United States does. They say, if you don't change your society the way we tell you, we're not doing business with you. If you don't do business with the people we tell you to, we won't do business with you. This is what that's coercion. That is exactly what they project onto China, is actually what they're doing themselves.
Yeah, and I'm no economics major or expert. I would like to say I do study economy, especially political economy, but even with my rudimentary understanding of economics, it's not profitable. Why is the high-speed rail not profitable? That means it's a failure. Why is China investing all over in these projects that end up failing? Because some of them do end up failing, and there are many reasons for it. But at the same time, this whole profitability argument or everything is failing, it totally negates the fact that if you don't have this basic infrastructure, as you said, you don't really have any kind of economy. Forget your model, but you're not going to be able to trade, do commerce. You're not going to be able to develop if you don't have lights on, if you don't have energy, if you don't have roads to drive through, if you don't have railways to get around, to move freight. You're not going to have the ability to run an economy, and that's been the unfortunate reality for a lot of these countries all over the world. Africa, Asia, many parts of Latin America, many parts of the Caribbean they are not connected because they were forcibly disconnected by outside powers, including the United States being a big part of that. So this whole "it's not profitable" thing. I've heard Chinese officials talk about the whole, high-speed rail may not be profitable in the short term. Well, they're like, let's just wait until we are able to implement this into our trade, both domestically, our economic activity, both domestically and abroad. It actually leads to huge gains economically, and also people's lives get better, and that also matters too. And so China never professes and actually actively says, we're not charity. We're not actually giving aid to anybody. Like, this is not aid. This is economic cooperation. But it's quite obvious that China has the model of, well, if you win, if things get better for you, then things will get better for us, because if you get richer, we'll get richer, we'll get stronger, we'll get prosperous together. Because if you don't have an economy that is functional, no matter what model you decide to develop within, we're not going to be able to do any business together. And I think that's the huge difference here. And I just wanted to pull up one last image to talk about. Let's see if it will let me do this. I don't think actually it will. It's not posting. It says window entire screen. I don't know if it'll let me. No. So anyway, the point is it was an image of railway built on the African continent by China, and you see it all over the place, all across Western Central, Northern Africa, Southern Africa. There's just railways everywhere. And this is it, and if you tried to find a similar map for how much the US has built, you wouldn't be able to find one. So I think that's just belaboring the point here, but I just wanted to put that out there. Anyway, any final thoughts on this topic, Brian?
Yeah, I've heard people argue, say with Kenya, China built this railway, and I think it opened in 2017, and they're complaining that it's not profitable, it's not, it's not practical. But the whole point is, in order to have the economic activity that makes it profitable and makes it practical, you have to build it first. It's not the other way around. You don't wait until it's not even feasible to have the type of economic activity that would make it practical without building it first. You have to build it first, and you have to have that foresight of eventually it's going to pay off. It's a long-term project. It's a long-term investment. I don't understand why people can't wrap their minds around that. And second of all, I've heard people say Kenya has much bigger problems. Why are they wasting time building this rail that nobody is using right now? Well, they're not using it right now, but they will increasingly be using it year to year. They say, well, they have terrorist problems, they have this or that problem. Why do you think they have those problems? Because things are not developed yet. The economy isn't doing well enough. That's what creates people who are malcontents or susceptible to extremism and violence and crime. If you improve your economy, you will drain the swamp of violence, of armed violence, of terrorism, armed militancy. Remember Xinjiang, China, Western China. I don't know if you had a chance to go there, Danny, but
I have. Not this trip, but yes, my first time.
and they had a really serious extremism problem, terrorism. Hundreds, thousands of people were being killed. And the terrorism was spreading across China and then across Asia. And then eventually thousands of Uyghur extremists were fighting alongside ISIS in Syria. And what did China do? They didn't bomb them. They began building. They were building infrastructure. They were training people, giving them jobs. And they developed the region. It's far-flung near Central Asia. It's not near the shores. It's not central in any sense of the word, but they built it up. They connected it with the rest of the country. They connected it with the rest of Eurasia. It's a key junction in the Belt and Road project.
Definitely.
And now the violence is gone. Now the terrorism is gone. It's a very stable place. Millions of tourists go there every year now, as a matter of fact, whereas they wouldn't have before. So that is the importance of thinking long-term, building infrastructure, not saying, well, we have we have terrorism that we have to worry about. Building infrastructure is going to be part of solving terrorism, part of solving instability.
So, Brian, I don't know if you see this. I can't see the screen anymore. Can you see?
I can. Yes, I can.
The screen? Okay, good.
Yes.
This is what I need 2 monitors, I guess, to truly do this from sharing the screen. But in any event, I just wanted to show, this is the image I was referring to of all of the railway that's been built across the African continent with the help of China, connecting. As you can see, these railways don't just connect within these countries. Anyone who knows the history of Africa knows that a lot of these countries are carve-ups from the old scramble for Africa during the mid-19th century. But you can see here that you have this is a famous railway, actually, the Ethiopia Djibouti railway here. And then you just have all across, right? Whether it's domestically within countries like Namibia, or whether you're looking at countries being connected in Central Africa. Basically, an incredible example of connectivity. And you won't find, as I said before, you won't find a similar map from the United States' side, and from the West, the entire collective West, for that matter. And I just think it's, as you said, Brian, it's so important to be able to recognize this point, is that this isn't charity, it's not interference. You can go across all these markers in a continent like Africa. China is providing this assistance, and even in its own country, Xinjiang, for example, very similar to some of these poorer countries, even just regionally, very poor part of China, but it is now connected to high-speed rail. It is. I took one 2020, I believe it was at that time. I was able to take one from Gansu province to Xinjiang. Like it's possible. So it exists, and that's one thing that's not often talked about. And but anyway, any closing remarks on the infrastructure issue?
Well, I just think overall, when we look at everything together, it really is important for people to understand that there is a huge difference between what China and Russia and multipolarism is doing versus US dominated unipolarism. We've watched unipolarism unfold over the decades. We can see the toll it has taken on the planet, and we can see how things that China and Russia are doing, it's undoing a lot of the damage, literally undoing the damage the US has done. They were removing unexploded ordnance the US dropped on Laos to then build the country's first railway, to take this impoverished, landlocked country that was bombed by millions of munitions, millions of tons of munitions. And now they're building railway across it, connecting these people, bringing in tourism, bringing their agricultural goods to markets in China, and then eventually also to the rest of Thailand. I mean, it's a no-brainer. It really is. And that's why the United States is, when they say they're going to compete with the Belt and Road Initiative, like I said, they're not competing with it. What they mean is they're going to poison people against China by lying to them, and then also funding militants and opposition groups to oppose it or even physically destroy the infrastructure. That is the battle that we are seeing unfold now worldwide. The proxy war in Ukraine against Russia is part of it. This conflict with Taiwan in the center of it, that is part of it. The South China Sea also, and also all of these political crises that I cover here in Southeast Asia. It's all tied to this one single, I guess you could say, geopolitical struggle between unipolarism and multipolarism. And I know which side I am on, and I think people should start to think about it in these terms, not left or right, conservative or liberal. These are meaningless labels. What do you actually believe in? What do you want the world to look like in the future? That's what I think we need to start asking. Danny, you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, no, totally. I agree with you, especially since I believe that any political understanding, any political orientation that one takes, it should be grounded in what's the reality in front of us. So what are the forces moving toward progress? What are the forces that are arresting progress or doing the opposite, bringing humanity, bringing entire nations, entire majorities of people into an abyss? And once we start asking that question, especially on a global scale, we can actually take a position. And so, a lot of things are coming up. The 2024 election here in the United States, the BRICS summit. I'm sure we'll be talking further about all of these things as they heat up. And, for me, just to end, and I can get your final remarks here too, is for me, it's like these are not just no-brainers, but increasingly they are becoming, and for me, they've always have been, but I think also they are. Sometimes we talk about purity, like it's purity test. Purity is, on these questions, given the consequences, it's going to be more important. Maybe we shouldn't frame it as purity terms, but in terms of, how firm should we be about questions that are truly existential for all of us, not simply the interests of the elite or whoever is pulling the strings on things like the Ukraine proxy war, but these matters of concern that truly do hold the future of all of us in their hands. I think being firm, right, on these questions is important, especially as we come up on these pretty important events for the entire world, the BRICS summit, and of course, and unfortunately, the U.S. presidential elections end up being important for the world as well. But anyway, any closing remarks before we begin to wrap up here?
No, I just think thank you very much for having me on. I think this is an important conversation that we have to keep having and keep developing as events unfold. is so important that people understand the big picture rather than being solely focused on the conflict in Ukraine. A lot of people are interested in it. They follow it day to day, and I get that. But you need to also understand it in the wider context. The political crisis, say here in Thailand, it's not really in the news, but it's simmering. It's one of those things that are always simmering until it's headlines and people wonder, how did this all happen? It's happening under the surface over many years, and then suddenly there will be chaos and violence, and it'll be in the headlines. We have to understand that in the bigger picture. And I talked about labels and ideology, and that's how people try to approach these. They look at it in a very isolated way, and they look who's left, who's right, and I'll be on the side of whoever superficially appears left, and then they leave out the fact that the NED is funding them, and the way it fits into the US versus China struggle, and then the whole multipolarism versus unipolarism struggle. So we have to always make sure we zoom out. It's okay to look at something in depth, up close. We also have to always make sure we take time to zoom out and see the full context that these things are unfolding in. It's really important that we just keep at it. I personally, I feel that it's a very unpleasant thing to do. I don't enjoy doing it. I don't enjoy talking about war and following it and watching what's unfolding. But it's important because it is. You said it's existential. It is. It's life and death. Where things are headed, it's life and death. Whether multipolarism prevails or not, it's going to be the difference of life and death for many people all around the globe.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.